Hey guys, welcome into the Collector Arthouse. Over the course of the next few videos, I'm going to take you on a journey through the early beginnings and the complete history of Sorcery Contested Realm. So, over the past several years, dating back to roughly 2021, I started to amass the largest, most vast, and early era pre alpha collection of Sorcery Contested Realm that exists in the world. So I'll have the pleasure to show you the actual physical cards of these early development pre alpha historic cards in Sorcery and talk about some of the development, the evolution from the very first prints to the pre alpha sample cards to the cards we know today in the main core sets. And today we're going to start with Spellcraft. So to start our journey, what I'm going to do is take you to the Sorcery Contested Realm Community Facebook group. So this is a group that I created in early 2022. So we're at about 5,100 members as of the time of this recording. And there's a lot of very interesting historical information in this group. I've posted every day since the inception of this group. There's a massive library of media content, posts, historical developments, early history research that I've done to really reveal the development of this incredible project. So back in the 2020 timeframe, even predating that, the first paintings for Sorcery Contested Realm, as we understand, were commissioned around the 2017-2018 timeframe. And at that time, a lot of the artists were calling the project Project Atlas. So the name of the game was not yet settled. And back in 2021, as Eric Olofsson, the creator of the game, started to build the web presence, the social media presence to market the game or talk about its early development leading up to its Kickstarter release, he was asking the community, for some thoughts and feedback on the ideas of potential names for this game. So the first, Sorcery, A Realm at War. Another concept idea, Avatar, A Realm at War. And finally, Atlas, A Realm at War. So again, the artists, as they were being commissioned for the very first paintings in this game, were calling this Project Atlas. We thought perhaps it was a code name, but as it turns out, maybe it was just that the name was not yet settled. And, talking to some friends of Eric and people around the community, it sounds like they were really trying to find the right balance of having like a good epic throwback kind of name to fit the genre or the essence and the spirit of what the game would be. And at first, Sorcery Contested Realm was where they were migrating to, and there was some differences of opinion as that sounded a bit derivative of Magic: The Gathering. But alas, it did settle on being Sorcery Contested Realm, of course. But here you have some really interesting early design history of those early possibilities. And then as we go to the overhead camera, what I'm going to show you today is Spellcraft specifically. And in future videos, we'll get through future playtest versions of the cards and sample cards to really give you a complete history of how this game has evolved. So as we go to the sample cards, before we do that, there was also one name that we did not see in the images, and that was Gridlord. So this came to light in Alpha as the first curio card, Gridlord. Let me tweak my lighting so you guys can see here. So on the front of this card, and you're going to have to check your cards carefully as you're opening the Alpha Kickstarter product. On the back of the Sorcerer, there's a variant called Gridlord. So again, a homage to one of the early potential name concepts of Sorcery before it became Sorcery. Gridlord. All right, so let's go max zoom and let's get into the Spellcraft. So what I have laid out before you here are spellbook cards, Atlas cards, and mitigate that glare a little bit, the tokens. All right, so let's start with the tokens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tokens. Now these cards here, the tokens, as you can see here, comparing size, they were about roughly half size, right? So when these were first printed, the company had asked the printer to cut them quarter size, right? So there was some confusion. They thought initially they meant half size and then half size of the half size. So that's how they ended up becoming quarter size as we know it today, which works very well when you stack the tokens on top of the original cards. But here you see them a little bit larger than they ended up being in final form. And you have the Foot Soldiers by Andrea Modesti. And you can see with the prints here, these are not perfectly cut. These were home printed. These Spellcraft cards are not cards that were printed from the Chinese factory. We know that because these sample cards came into being around the 2022-2023 era, which was years later from when these Spellcraft cards originated. So this perhaps even predated the 2020-2021 era when they were being commissioned as Project Atlas. So very early days, early concept, and you start having some of the artwork from the artists, right? So we would presume that perhaps around 2018 to 2020 timeframe, this is when these Spellcraft cards originated, because we had some of the illustrations that were, many of the illustrations, in fact, that were used from the game, as we're going to see today. So the various Spellcraft, Andrea Modesti, and of course, there's several Foot Soldier variants now, but here we have all of the same art from Andrea. All right, so we'll start with the Atlas. To talk about the Atlas site, you must first start with the names of the regions that were on the sample cards, the pre-alpha cards. So when these cards came out in alpha, the card back artwork itself was done by Francesca Berald, but each of the regions were named here on the back of the Atlas site. So you had Unland, Midland, Highland, and Firelands. So when it was printed in alpha, those names were removed, and we just had the generic map back. So you notice a few things: the color saturation, the difference. Of course, the printing is going to be different because it wasn't done from the Chinese factory. And you have Spellcraft Atlas. Okay. So first we have the towers from Mikhail Nagipal. So that it was simply called Tower in the early days. And then we had the revelation of the new names in alpha. So in this set of cards, you're going to find some of the very early concepts in terms of game mechanic, casting costs, even aesthetic layout of the card to some extent, and a lot of different card titles, right? A lot of that, all of those different parameters evolved. You also have the copyright symbol, which is consistent on the sample cards, but when it was printed in alpha, we went to the alpha symbol. So destroy, discovery, add 1 mana to your mana pool. So discovery, also different keywords back in the Spellcraft era, replaced for Genesis. Okay, so let's do it like this. Tuck that back there. From Dan Seagrave, Ruins. One of the first dual sites from Alpha counts as both a tower and a desert. So you'll find differences in title, typeline text, and mechanic in many cases. That's an iconic piece from Dan Seagrave, Ruins, Dual Land. Now we have the complete cycle of the desert sites from Oranja Art. Each of the 3 artworks, again, simply called Desert on each, just like the towers. And now the towers themselves by Mikhail Nagipal. Gothic Tower and the 3rd tower. So complete cycle of each of the towers, the dual site, and the deserts. Now for the fun stuff. The other thing you're going to find in here is artwork that was never used, or still to this day has not been used in the actual game. And here's a first, right off the top, Doug Kovac's Rolling Boulder. So of course we know Rolling Boulder to be one of the more flavorful cards in the game, with artwork by Jesse Pilkus. So in the early days, there were pieces that were commissioned with the same name title and repurposed or reused, or not used at all yet in the game. So in Sorcery, there's always strong correlation between the card title, the game mechanic, the typeline text, and sometimes some artwork works a little better than others. And here you have an example from Doug Kovac's. So I actually have 2 copies of the Rolling Boulder from Doug. Fireball, Doug Kovac's once again. In the early era cards, you saw a lot of area splash effect, splash damage, and some of it persevered and prevailed in alpha. And in other times, it was streamlined, changed. The text box, the game mechanic titles were streamlined a lot more to simplify and be more direct on how the mechanic works. Another from Doug Kovac's, Doomsday Prophet. Really awesome, unique in alpha. Quarrel Kobolds. In alpha became Quarrelsome Kobolds. So a lot of changes. There's also rarity change. Title change once again, the Shackle Cerebus. instead of Cerebus and Chains from Alan Pollock. An elite demon dog on a short leash. The Ornithopter. So here we see a name adopted from Magic the Gathering that had a very significant change when it came to Alpha. Beautiful artwork by Elvira Shakarova really stands out as very unique compared to our other pieces. Ornithopter. The Rimland Nomads. So in many cases, the title harkened back to the region in the realm. So in some cases, interestingly, even though those titles were removed from the back of these Spellcraft cards, in some of the titles, the region reference still prevailed. So you wonder if Sorcery may evolve that idea and expand that in future iterations of the game. Puppet Master, Liz Danforth. The Weary Pilgrim, as you know, became Wayfaring Pilgrim in Alpha. Okay, Highland Titan by Tony Sudlow. The Elite Giant. Peasant Rebellion, very interesting. Did not make it into the Alpha debut, but we saw this come out in Arthurian Legends. So the painting done many, many years ago, several years before Alpha, was not used in Alpha, but finally found its fit and its home in Arthurian Legends. Really nice artwork, Andrea Modesti. The Belmont Longbowman, the York Crossbowman. Here you see some design detail changes. I was talking about the aesthetics of the card and kind of the focal aspects of the card. Here, the tower crept up into the title box. This was actually brought down a bit, and you do not see that coming up into the text box in the final version. Rattlesnakes, Mikhail Nagypal. Fire Blast, Lindsay Crummett. And here we have an artwork that has never been used in the game, Sleeping Giant. And we have the Sleeping Giantess by Liz Danforth. This was done by Elvira Polakowska, and we have not yet seen this artwork in the game. We also see a different creature type in Mythic. An Elite Mythic rests his eyes here. And we see that in curio cards in future iterations of the game, but never a mechanic in the game itself. So another concept in the early development era. Common Sense, one of the more powerful cards in the Alpha debut. Drew Tucker. Haste by Drew Tucker. All right, here's a big one. Fiery Inferno. So, legendary magic. Of course, we don't have the legendary keyword, so this is super flavorful. An amazing artwork by Brian Smith. We know this is Brian Smith. I did an interview. You can go to collectorarthouse.com and learn more about Brian Smith, his background, some of the early development work he did, some of the iterations and evolution of some of his art pieces. And there's no artist attribution on this one, so it doesn't even say his name on here. But I did confirm with Brian that this is a piece that Brian Smith has done. It was once called Genocide when it was first commissioned, but in print, Fiery Inferno only exists in Spellcraft so far. Perhaps we'll see it in the Gothic debut. Eastern Dragon, and then we have the West East Dragon as a curio in Sorcery. And a card, another one, not yet used by Jeff Easley, Fireland Efreets. So in Gothic, will we see Efreets? Spirits, demons, undead, monsters? A lot to come, but we have not yet seen the Fireland Efreets by Jeff Easley, done many years ago, predating Alpha. Waypoint Portal, beautiful artwork by Easley. The iconic Grey Wolves with a detector mechanic. So again, a mechanic that was not used in the final production of the game. The wolves gain +1 power for each nearby wolf. Or it simply says ordinary beasts. Another interesting detail. You never see that in the final production of Sorcery. You see a much more elaborate typeline text to add more flavor to the game. The Panorama Manticore. Dispel, Elvira Polakowska. Battering Ram. Scavenging Fiend, Dan Seagrave. The Hammer Pendant, which turned into the Torch Hammer Pendant, the Torch Hammer Trinket in Alpha. The iconic, the infamous, the fabulous Boss Troll, which got the Curio treatment, ultimately, in its final Curio version. The Spiralich, the Undead, the iconic Pudge Butcher. 2 copies of those. Scourge Spider by Brian Smith. Squirming Mass. Backstab. believed to be short printed in foil version in alpha. And finally, Critical Strike, which has the quick magic effect, right? So we saw this in the sample cards, where there's a 0 casting cost, and quick magic meant that you could cast it on your opponent's turn. Target creature deals twice its power and damage this turn, draw a spell. So you would be able to cast this on your opponent's turn, deal twice as much damage, and draw a spell on their turn. So the last thing I wanted to show you guys, if we go back to the website, let me pull that down, and I'm going to show you the Collector Arthouse website. There is a page on here under Collector's Corner called Spellcraft Card Gallery. So here I have archived for provenance all of the cards that I just showed you that exist in Spellcraft form. There was actually a few others that, so myself and one other person, to my knowledge, are the only people that have ever owned these cards. We acquired them from someone who helped with the project in the very early days, officially worked for Eric's Curiosa to help with various aspects of the game. And I was very fortunate to be able to acquire these. There's the Krakatoa by Aranja Art. So that one was offered via auction at Sorcery Community Facebook group and Collector Arthouse Discord. Browse, same thing. That's been offered. There's a Sleeping Giant, which we saw. One of the Grey Wolves. Infernal Legion. So the Infernal Legion with the alternate art, which became known as the Curio art. So some very interesting Curio findings. Here's an early version of Holy Ground with a different, this was repainted by Mikhail Nagypal. So you see quite a difference there in the artistic approach. And there you have the complete archive. I believe I may also have an Ancient Dragon. I forget if that's in the playtest card. In the next video, I'm going to cover playtest cards. And we'll talk about, so this was Spellcraft, early playtest cards in a sense. And then there were different variants of playtest cards. And then finally, we'll talk about the different variants of sample cards. So we have the first edition print sample packs. We'll have the pre-con cards. We'll have all of the different sample pack variants that were printed from all around, distributed all around the world and marked differently. So we'll talk about those differences. But let me know how you guys like this video. Please leave a comment, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions about the early development history of Sorcery. You're going to see a lot of unique things on this channel. One of ones, very limited population, really interesting, fascinating early development of Sorcery Contested Realm. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.